Walking in the rain, I'm calling out a single name. God sent, I witnessed the light, but the darkness took me by the hand. Just when I think I'm almost home, just when I think I'm almost home. Just when I think I'm almost home, just when I think I'm almost home, just when I think I'm So I waited the depths of the sea till I found an island. I fashioned a bed in a tree. Just when I think I'm almost home.
Right, in 1991, we'd celebrated the 125th anniversary of the church, and there were a number of important things going on at the time. One of them was the area congregations. The first of these had been Hallswell, but that had become an independent church by this stage. And also what was happening was an outburst of all sorts of different ministries into the community, and that was very much a growing area. And then on top of all that, there was this very large commitment that we had to global mission.
The Missions Council at Braden came out of a very, very early missions convention, a missions week that we had, where the speaker said that one of the things that we really needed to do was to establish a group that was set aside to develop and to look after the whole overseas mission side. So rather than it being just a part of another group, it was a group of people who were passionate about overseas mission. We would have about eight people, so there would have been the overseas missions pastor, which for many years was Don McKenzie, then Karen Beard, and then Helen, and usually if there had been an admin person they were on, and the others were elected from the church or co-opted on.
We had a visit from Murray in which he was setting up or planning to set up a overseas missions group to cultivate the church in terms of global mission and also to be a sending agency.
One of the reasons that we started was in one of the very early missions weeks where we had faith promise, introduced faith promise giving. The amount of money that came in was far and away above anything that we imagined. Immediately we had, as a group, to decide, well, what are we going to do with this money? The first priority was always the people that we had sent from Spraden, right in the early days, Bishu and Vijaya in Bangladesh, because they had come and been a part of the church for a little while.
There were 64 that went out during my time, yes. And they went to 21 different countries. There were some that were involved in church planting, in discipleship training, teaching at Bible school and teaching in children's school, evangelism, medical, flying with JARS, that is the aviation ministry of Wycliffe Bible translators. There were some that were involved in pastoral care, aid and development, mission leadership, Bible translation, setting up business and mission, and mission support, both from a technical and an administration arena.
And then as people went out, there was a lot of pastoral care for all the people who went out, organising or looking after their needs and the missions they were involved in. And of course every year, regular as clockwork, was the missions convention, Global Missions Week, whatever you like to call it. And that was a really important part for us.
So we came to realise that our role in terms of sending people would be primarily to the areas where the need is the greatest, where you had less personnel working. In other words, the poor of the poor. That's to send our people amongst the poor. And then we also, in the latter stages of my time anyway, began to see also that it was important to have people in more strategic roles. In other words, training and equipping others. So that if you're sending someone to be involved in evangelism, for example, the preference would be for someone who would train and equip others rather than do it themselves. And so as time wore on, people, or some people, began to pick up the thought, well look, if you're doing this overseas, we should be doing exactly the same thing at home.
In the mid-80s, Marj and I and our family came back from a mission trip to Hong Kong and Manila. And walking through the slums of Manila, I realised we had to do as a church back home what the missionaries were doing overseas. And so I came back and started preaching about Jesus' heart for the poor. And this was a really difficult time in New Zealand society at that stage.
Up to that time, we mainly focused on global mission. But there was an awareness that more and more people were surfacing at the church office, asking for help, as people were looking for community and somewhere to attach themselves to belong. So that's what was surfacing in the community at the time. And so the church appointed me really to go and sort of seek out these issues. At the same time, within the church, Marj Robertson was preaching on compassion to the poor and also dream your dreams and encouraging people to go out into the community and put legs to their walk.
A lot of these things in my recollection seem to have evolved more spontaneously amongst the membership of the church, not as a direct result of a shift in ministry emphasis. No, these were people who had specific giftings and callings, and the affirmation for their starting commencement, if you like, certainly came from within the church. So in our hero's case, a lot of people contributed gifts and loans, interest-free loans, to enable us to get started.
This was part of the permission-giving nature at Spraydon. It was allowing the Holy Spirit to work, and each one of these was grown through people being passionate about something, being led by the Holy Spirit, and really wanting to step out in huge faith at considerable cost to themselves to get these ministries going.
I think it was 1978 that Adrian Hogarth began a craft group, and that was the very first community ministry we had. And so then we started a babies creche for it. And then this bloke turned up who was a brand new Christian, and he was unemployed at the time, and he started helping with the creche. This was Graeme Reid, and then he had this vision for starting a community help centre up on Lincoln Road.
We set up this place in Lincoln Road, which had a shop there. People would come in. It had a drop-in centre. Once again, building a community. and which ended up with garden projects, which ended up with screen printing, which ended up with teaching people sewing. So that, and the major thing that that we learnt from it is just the strength in bringing people together and giving them a sense of belonging.
After the Community Help Centre was established, there were a whole lot of other ministries began, like Crossover and Kingdom Resources and Arahura and the preschool and Serona. And then into the 90s we had things like the English Language Centre and eventually Project Esther, that was led by Daphne Marsden.
But yeah, God started to lay on my heart and our heart in Addington that I was to put my energy into this particular people group.
Over the years, all sorts of other ministries began to develop as people had these dreams and visions, and we tried to ask, how can we help you get these off the ground? And there were things like Stepping Stone, which has had a tremendously positive impact on mental health, particularly for younger adults, I think, which was the original aim. And then the youth group we had transformed itself into a youth community and has had a remarkable impact around, especially around this part of Christchurch. And then Juliet Martin, who was the children's leader at the time, started the SHARP, the Spraydon Holiday and After School program, which has gone on for many years now. So these kind of things just, and many others, just kept emerging.
The impact on the wider community has been huge. We always saw ourselves on a journey of planting seeds. And so we saw a number of people who came in and were befriended by the volunteers who actually gave their life to the Lord. And I believe that Spraydon has been blessed through being shaped by the poor and the needy.
In 1977 we put up this new building, which is the current auditorium, and 3 years later it was full up, and so we started the Hallswell congregation, and then just a few years after that it was full up again. But by this stage the small group ministry had developed, and they were largely based around area groups, and so we started having a worship service on a Sunday for the particular areas. They grew as a result of space pressure, really. It's because they were at Ilam and Upper Riccarton and Addington and Summerfield and all around the place.
The area congregations began as a strategy, partly to cope with growth in the church, and also it was around clusters of house churches. So we had a house church right next door to the Summerfield Community Centre, so it was a logical place for us to meet.
Both of us had been to missionary training college, and we were at Spraydon as missionary interns. We were doing youth work, and Spraydon felt that this was a mission field and that we would be likely candidates for it.
So I started off at Ilam Area Congregation. We were involved in youth work. We did quite a bit of youth work leadership stuff in the church, and they asked us would we consider leading a congregation. It was 1989, and so a lot of prayer, a lot of thinking about that, and we ended up saying yep, and we went along and started leading Ilam. So we really focused on students. We tried to do things that students would be interested in, and we pitched ourselves at the Thinking Students Church. Yeah, when we started out, we were there's probably about 60 or 70 people, and then after a few years it grew to the maximum the hall would hold, which is about 220. So on we have student lunch days once a month. We'd set a topic like sexuality or relationships or whatever else, and advertise it reasonably well across the university, and then have a lunch after, and those days were always packed.
I appreciated being part of it because it was so diverse. I wasn't surrounded by students, just being around other students. That I know lots of a range of ages, mostly from that time that I was out of that little community, probably 60, 100 people, something like that. Yeah, it was flipping awesome. Everyone's got a huck in, lifting the chairs, playing the music, even if you're not very good. And even they let me to preach, actually. They let me preach. Oh, it was so embarrassing because I think I cried in the middle of it, but they were so supportive. It was a great place to allow my faith to grow and have gracious people hanging there for me.
I think the community became very positive towards the church, very positive. Obviously it was a long-term thing, but we were there 3 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It was a creative birthing place, really, for a lot of the things that eventually merged in Spraden's ministry focus.
In 1980 we'd had our first church plant out at Hallsville. It was 2 home groups who had formed this congregation, which by the mid-80s had grown into an independent church.
It was way back in 1967 when this Oaklands area was first started to be built and houses went in. This was going quite a long way back. And a small Sunday school was set up by Colombo Street Baptist. Judy and Noel Cross, who still attend at Spraden, were part of that group of teachers with their children. Then, after a few years, Spraden Baptist took it over. I think it fell out of, or it sort of died after a while, and around about 1979, a number of people in this area were starting to worship at Spraden, and the number grew, and very soon Spraden set up a local home group here under Jim and Kath McLean, and that home group grew very, very quickly. Another one was set up under Howard Pilgrim, and the 2 coalesced together, and we decided that we would like to have our own services out here. And so in February 1980, we had our first service in the local Oakland school. And the Sunday school met in one classroom, the adults met in another. And that grew over the next couple of years. We moved down to what was then St John of God down at Aidenfield, slightly bigger, into their chapel. And when we outgrew that, we felt very much led by the Lord through prophecy and so on to have our own church building. And one of the prophetic words was that we were to have a building that had no nails. And this threw us for a while because we couldn't think of how on earth you could have a building without nails. But then we heard about frame-house buildings where everything just locks together like Lego. And we went ahead with that, and we purchased a frame-house building which came in sort of pallets, I suppose, in those days. And we literally built it ourselves, plank by plank.
Kids too.
Kids as well. Everybody came in and did their bit. And eventually we opened it in early 1984, and that became our first church.
We started a craft group, which was very big at reaching out into the community. We had quite a big Sunday school, and so we had to get another building for that. And one of the things that arose out of that was the development of the preschool, the Lighthouse, which currently operates. We had prior to having the building, we'd had a little shop in Nottingham Ave under the Acorn Trust, and that was a little sort of drop-in centre where people could go and from the community and just drop in. We had several outreaches. We had a tent meeting before the building was up with Mark Jackson. We had another big camp with Tom Frew, sort of a meeting. One of the things that's grown out, of course, is the light party, which is one of the current things. We had a budget advisory service here.
Yeah, we had quite a number of community outreaches. We had people who were looking after or keeping a pastoral eye on students from Lincoln University. We had Japanese school children coming through in groups, and this was their base, and our people were hosting them. We set up a group visiting the local prison, and that's still carrying on today. And also allied with that is the giving Christmas gifts to the children.
Angel Tree.
Yeah. Pardon?
Angel Tree.
Angel Tree. Giving Christmas gifts to the children of men and women who are in prison, and that's been carrying on for a number of years too. But we had quite a number of other community ministries that to care for people, groups for old people. As Janet has already said, we had a very strong children's ministry, which also grew into having outreaches for children in the community. And also linked in with that was a lot of our people were tied in with the Bible in Schools program in Horswell and in Oakland schools, and that carried on for many years too. In 97, 98, we felt we were far too small. We were constrained within the present Framos building, and so we set up a building committee and had the new auditorium designed for us by an architect, and that was to seat around about 300, 350. We moved into that in 1998, and very soon we were filling that building too, and we were getting 250 to 300 people at a service on a Sunday morning. Children's work had continued, that was very large, also the youth group as well, and the pre-teens group, so there was a lot sort of going on.
The interesting thing about the design of that building is that when we asked an architect to design it, the design he came up with matched a vision that one of the members of the congregation had of a prow of a boat. And if you actually go and look at the building, that's actually what it looks like. It's really been a heart for people. You know, the original saying was that we were a hospital church, and the idea was that people would come in who were hurting, and they might come in from anywhere. They might stay, or they might just be there for a while, be healed, and then go back to wherever they came from. But the whole concept has always been it's a community facility, and it's a healing facility, and that's been what we've had all the way along. That was part of the prophetic word that we got right at the beginning when the church was founded.
One of the strong emphases, I think, also was helping people find their spiritual giftings and finding ways of using their giftings in various ministries. And we encouraged people to set up ministries, to start them off under direction, and people seem to latch onto that idea too, that hey, I've got a place in this community of God's people here. I've got something I can do, something I can contribute, and the church grew because of that. I think people weren't just coming on a Sunday morning to be part of an audience. We were literally an organism of God's people, we felt, and meeting together, yes, for fellowship and for worship, but also spreading out, and that also included our interest in overseas missions as well, which goes right back to the very beginning of the church.
Yeah, we adopted the idea of Spraden's Faith Promise and giving to overseas mission, and our first overseas mission money went to the Philippines, the Servants Mission that Spraden had there, and then we felt called to support people in Papua New Guinea, and so we had Ken and Jan Matthews initially, and then we took up the Cars, who are now partners with us at Spraden, and the very first missionaries to go out, so far the only ones to have gone directly from Horswell, were Peter and Lily Capon, who've gone to Thailand.
In 1991, Mark Harrington started talking to us about this idea he had of using business as mission, and as far as we know, there weren't too many others around the world, if any, who were thinking like this, and so Mark was a kind of radical pioneer of what was to develop into a significant movement.
We had wondered about the possibility of doing business, providing employment, give us a role.
I mean, we'd heard of tent makers, where people do a job as a cover to get into a country in a way, but we hadn't really thought of doing business as mission. We'd never heard the term. We brought the concept to servants, and servants, it's not bosses, and, but they agreed that this is most likely that was the best approach for this country. So we actually resigned from servants, so we could say we weren't missionaries, we were Christians doing business.
It's a light engineering company.
We will act as sort of like an interface between the foreign embassies and banks and companies and the local economy.
So we started off employing one person. It's still going, and it's been going for 21 years, and we have nothing to do with it now, but I'm not sure how many people employed,
42,
between
I
30
think,
and
last
40
year.
or something like that.
They're all local people, all local people. A lot of people would say, why are you here? Why are you running a business here? And we'd say, often within a Muslim culture, we'd talk about our father's faith and our faith. And we'd talk about in our faith and my father's faith, we believe in God's concern for everyone, whether it's our faith or whoever he's concerned. And we feel this is the best way to help the country. We're not giving out money, we're offering employment and skills. And whenever you said that, they'd say, that is so true, giving money doesn't help, that's so true. This one particular guy said, it's like you're on a mission. So yeah, so in some ways we weren't overtly doing things Christian-wise, but we would pray. And you see in your work life is where people see what you believe and how you behave, particularly in business, how ethical you are and whether you're going to cut corners.
By the mid-1970s, we were having a lot of pastors and other church leaders around the country wanting to come and pay us visits, and this was starting to take a lot of my time and others' time. And we thought, why don't we invite them all to come at once and we'll run a conference. And the first one of these, I think it was 1979, and it was very small, about 50 people and so on. But over the years, we ran them more or less every 2 years or so. And although they may have started small, by the end we were getting about 1,000 people coming. They were very big. It was almost like a confidence boost. They thought, hey, we can do all this stuff. And all these people want to come from all over the country and from Australia to find out what our church is doing, you know. And I think it had a very positive effect. For people in the church, they were a bit daunted as they got bigger and bigger. They became quite a big undertaking. In fact, it was sort of all hands to the pump for the whole church, not just the staff. As they got quite big, we used the other churches in the area as venues for seminars and so on. It was great. I mean, there were people took a week of their holidays so they could drive buses around taking people to the venues. So they became big church-wide events. Yeah, even these days I meet people around New Zealand, especially from the North Island, who tell me stories about how they brought a group of people from their church down to one of these conferences and how it turned the whole life of their church around, and they still remember it kind of decades later, which is very encouraging. After the Community Help Centre had got established, they started having a Bible study group on a Tuesday night, and all sorts of needy people started coming along.
At first we just had bare feet, a dog and the fire on, and half a dozen people, but it grew to 30, and then we had 1 or 2 musicians came in from the church and beefed up the music, and it grew to 50, and it was wall to wall, even the shop was full of people. And so we were really surprised, but realised that God was doing something.
Yeah, the group had moved from Lincoln Road down to the church hall, and then they'd outgrown that and moved into the church itself. And by that stage we saw something really significant was happening here and realised we need to recognise that as one other congregation of the church alongside the other already existing area congregations. When we'd finished the building, the auditorium, in 1977, it was full up in about 4 years, even though we'd started the Horswell congregation. And so we had this audacious dream that we brought to the church of building again, just 4 years later, to a building twice the size. And amazingly, we had a secret ballot and we got a unanimous vote to go ahead with it. The only problem was we couldn't acquire the sections that we needed. People wouldn't sell to us. And so we started the area congregations in that time, and it took 7 years until the end of that time. And finally we'd got all the sections. We start building, and the building was finally completed in 1994.
When I started in 1989, part of the thing was that I had to be the person from the pastoral leadership team to oversee this building project. So the church had been working on plans, and it was being costed out at about 1.5 million. Now at the time that just seemed impossible for us, and we were a church for the poor. We didn't feel we could justify to spend that sort of money on a church. And we started on a journey to re-look at our thinking, could we do this? It was that terrible winter when there was huge snow everywhere and this sort of thing, and they were digging these holes out in for the huge footings for the steel beams, filling with water and all this sort of thing, and ice and snow and so on. So it was a pretty difficult start to it, but it got underway, and I think by about 1994 we had the building closed in, the floor was down, but there was no sound system. The lighting probably might have been in, I'm not sure, but we were just struggling with the next step, and the decision was made. We're bursting at the seams in the auditorium, we need to get in there. So we decided that we would borrow some money. We went out and got interest-free loans from people, and away it went. And I think we opened in October 1994, and which was marvellous. Mid-February of whatever year it was, one of the congregation who I knew, as they came in, handed me an envelope, have a look at that, Don. And they went and sat down, so I wandered along the back and opened the envelope, and inside was I'm going to lose it here. Was a blank cheque with a note to say, whatever is still owing at the 31st of March, you can write out this cheque for that amount. I had to keep that quiet. I told Murray and nobody else, because we really needed to carry on with the appeal. And at the end of March, I wrote out a cheque for an amount substantially over $100,000.
The problem we had with the area congregation leader, we had quite a big staff, but they were all generalists. They were all pastors of these little congregations. And so we realised that if we were going to develop specialist ministries, we needed to pull our resources back from these congregations into the bigger operation.
So people felt torn, really torn, because it was a great church. Spraydon was a great church, had this massive global program, people wanted that, but they also wanted what they had at Ireland, a strong commitment then to the student ministry, so people didn't want to lose that. But also people had a strong commitment to Spraydon, so it was a torn mix. Murray came over and spoke, and Murray would say today, he said it to me, it wasn't his best message, and some people got their backs up and they wrote him letters, and he came back in midweek to try and talk about closing the congregation and everyone, let's all go back to Spraydon. But by then there was quite a strong group that were going, no, we're not going to do that.
And I think people felt that when it was eventually called back into Spraydon, there was nothing wrong with the model, and it would have been quite viable as an entity on its own.
At the start there was high degrees of respect. There was no sort of sense in the church itself that you're leaving us or you're making the wrong decision. There was none of that, although there was some pretty strong views about Murray and the elders and the decision to close Ireland and come back.
And so that proved to be probably the most difficult leadership situation I had to work through this. And we lost some people as a consequence of pulling them back together again. So
I think overall it was a good move. It was the right move, and the church wasn't growing in 5 areas. I think in terms of Ireland, there could have been more done to bring a successful student ministry across from Ireland and linking it into Spraydon.
There wasn't a reaction like some of the other congregations, because Brimwa was strong enough to support itself. If people were given the choice if they wanted to go back to Spraydon or not, I would estimate, 10% may have gone back.
That was the cool thing about the whole Brindwa or area congregation. And it was a dying church, and it became revitalised and then became independent again. And that was really good, yeah.
By the time the decision was made to regroup the area congregations, the smaller ones hadn't been sustainable, and so there were only 5 left at that stage, and 3 of them came back to Spraydon, and 2 of them, Ilam and Brynwood, became independent churches.
So in the end, I think Uric was one of the area congregations that said, we love this, we don't want to do it, but for the sake of mission we can see what you're saying. So yeah, we made the tough transition back for the sake of mission and the vision of a 7-day-a-week church.
At the end of the day, you've got to ask the question, what's the bottom line of what we're about? And I've always felt the bottom line is we want to help people become followers of Jesus. And the congregations, good that they were for fellowship and so on, we weren't seeing it happening. And that was the challenge we had to face.
And so we shifted from being the Spraydon Baptist Youth Group to SYC, Spraydon Youth Community, as we realised it wasn't just the Bible studies and the program, it was the culture of who we were as a community and the lifestyles of our leaders that really was making a difference. And as we focused on that, the numbers of leaders grew, and the bar for what it meant to be a leader grew as well, but it drew people who were attracted to a community who were on a mission to, bring, life to young people. We've run touch rugby modules over the years. We've run, we've had the youth house, just run crazy parties and balls and, obviously the youth work. We've been doing stuff there that are just engaging with young people in their world. But of course, it's a youth community. It's not just a program. It's a community of people. And there have been leaders over the years who have delayed overseas trips, who have changed jobs, who have stayed in town in order to be part of that community, because they've actually thought it's the community and the culture and the lifestyle of their life together that actually, is the matrix, it's the substance of the transfer of faith and the experience of, this is what the kingdom of God looks like for young people.
Once we built the gym and the area congregations had come back, this released a lot of our resources to do church-wide ministries. And one of the things I'd often thought about was way back in the day in evangelical churches, they used to have on a Sunday night a gospel service, and I've often wondered what would it look like these days if we had a service that was much more accessible to people who weren't yet believers, as opposed to just having every service for people who are already Christians. And it was around this time that a group of us went up to Auckland to listen to Bill Hybels and a team from Willow Creek, and I thought, man, these guys have done their homework on this. And a couple of years later, Hybels came back to New Zealand, and this time he didn't just go to Auckland, he came to Christchurch and he came to Spraydon. And so we had quite an interaction with him, and he said to us, you folk, you've got to come over to Chicago and see what we're doing. And so a group of us went there, and we decided we could learn from their experience and look at it in a New Zealand context and figure out how can we do something like this in New Zealand. And that's how the Seeker services were born.
What we were trying to achieve was that the services would be seeker friendly, and what we meant by that was we did a bit of research at the time on what was called the Engel scale, and the Engel scale was talking about where placing people on this scale. Where were they? Were they churched? Were they unchurched? Had they had any exposure to the gospel? Had they made some kind of decision for Christ at some point? Where were they on their journey? And so what we decided was that we wanted to sort of be aiming the services really at those who were kind of on the not yet believer part of the scale. And so from the outside, the buzz was very, very positive about what we were doing Sunday nights. And a lot of people's lives were really transformed and changed as a result of that.
What had been created during this time, we came to realise, was a kind of flight path into the church for people. Like there was the community ministries on the outside, and most of the adult converts that we were seeing during this period, their first connection was with a community ministry, and then the Sunday night service. And although for some people it was the Sunday night service first, and then on into Alpha, which was led by Ted Wiggins at the stage and was a highly effective ministry. And Ted used to run what he called the Alpha graduation services, which were actually baptism services on a Sunday night. And so this was a period where we saw a number of adult converts, which was very encouraging.
Wayne and I were coming back to this big church, having been so involved at Ilam, and thinking, what are we going to do here? How can we contribute to the church? What can we do? And saw this and thought, this is us. The dream was born, really. We decided that if we were going to do it, we would do it weekly, and that somehow we were going to transform that auditorium into a welcoming place which would fit in with the seeker services, which had also started on Sunday night.
Pam and Duane Arnold stood up in church one morning and set up their vision for the cafe. And I thought, this ties perfectly in with what I want to do.
So every single Sunday night at 4 o'clock we met with a group of people and we set up the auditorium as a cafe.
I loved it. I loved it. The other thing, of course, that happened within the CAF was it became a two-way mission, in that we started getting people who needed job experience, people who were disenfranchised or had other reasons for not working permanently, and it became a ministry within a ministry. The area where the cafe now is was grass with a tree in the middle, where people used to gather after the service.
I think it's had a huge impact, really, on people's attitude to hospitality, to the availability of it, really. People don't always want to invite people home, but they can just ask people to come and have a coffee. So newcomers can be made welcome there. It's sort of like the living room of the church. It's the equivalent of our home, but it's there, and it's warm and it's friendly and it's outgoing, and it's an opportunity for people just to chat and build relationships, and nothing like doing it over coffee and food. Quite biblical, that, isn't it? Very New Testament food. Yes, it is.
We had, Graeme Reid to my left and Daphne Marsden to my right, doing cool things for actually marginalised people, and actually rolling our sleeves up and doing this word, sign and deed. Well, how do we do that as a youth group, And so we looked around and saw that our high schools are the obvious place. We work with, everyday young people. They're all at school, so we started getting involved with the schools. Started doing that in the late 90s. And that was the beginning of 24/7 youth work. 24/7 is a network of churches who have an agreement with their local school to provide youth workers in that school. So primarily high schools and some intermediates. We're basically just in there to serve the school, and whatever the needs are of the school, we want to try and meet that. So we look at what are the skills of the youth worker and what are the needs of the school, and try and match the two together. So our youth leaders are paid to be youth workers in schools. And since then, the graph for settings doing 24/7 youth work just continued to grow. And now I think the number's up to 73 schools in the country are involved in a relationship between a church and a school. Probably over 100 churches in almost every denomination you can think of is involved in it. So I think what was Braden in our southwest has had a part to play in, doing something quite kingdom oriented.
During these years, a number of different aspects of the church had finally sort of coalesced together, and so there were a lot of very encouraging developments continued to go. Some new ministries were emerging, and a lot of other things were functioning very effectively.
Well, Linda and I were sitting at her house one Saturday afternoon talking about what we had visited around Christmas time when we were kids, and we felt that there was nothing much around like that, so we started talking about what we could perhaps do. The first set that people walked into, we built a wall of Christmas trees, so that brought us a pine smell into the building, and we bought a little kids swimming pool, and we had a little fountain in that, and then people walked around all the trees into, I suppose it was a bit like a cave, but we built a big indoor waterfall out of some board and plastic, and then they walked into, once again, a bit like a cave. It was all covered over, and we had tables that had train sets. We had the Connect's big ball factory. We bought a whole lot of soft toys, so we had Santa playing cricket with the angels, and had all like a little grandstand around with different dolls and toys, like they were all watching the game.
The grotto was started in 2001, and it went for 3 days, very short, and actually it was a very special little grotto. 1,600 people came through, mostly church people. We did put a few flyers around the place, but mostly church people and some friends of theirs. And the next year we opened, and we ran it for considerably longer, probably close to nearly 2 weeks. And so over the 15 years we've gone up to about 38,000.
We've had a great deal of enjoyment out of watching people coming through, seeing the joy on people's faces, particularly kids, but also adults, and just listening to them as they go through and seeing them enjoy the whole thing. I think one of the things that we really wanted for the grotto was to be able to bring people into the church and see that the church is not a scary place. And I think, considering the numbers of people that we've had through, I think, you know, we've done that. And there have been a number of people who have come to the church as a result of the grotto. So that's been, you know, really good. And it's that sort of thing that keeps us going.
I mean, a lot of the time it's just so much fun, it's incredible, and other times you have to dig really deep, and it's just not going to happen if you don't. Or we've got deadlines and we just have to meet them. We don't have a choice. The grotto's going to open the next morning, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and we're still not finished. You have to stay. However, the grotto is so much fun to see hundreds or thousands of people come through, and to see them getting enjoyment from stuff that we've made and built is just so rewarding. It's really incredible.
We had no idea that we would ever be here for 40 years. We started off thinking we might be here for a couple of years, you know, because it was a pretty dismal place, you know, when it came. And there was a very faithful and good brother who said to me, "You're going to shed a lot of tears in this place, Sonny," you know. And so it was hardly a great start, you know, and so we realised it'd be difficult, and we thought we might only stay 2 or 3 years. We ended up staying 40 years.
The 40-year celebrations were really, really interesting because they came at a time of transition, and we thought it was just great in that the concentration wasn't on the fact that we were finishing, but it was on the celebration of the 40 years that had been. So in that sense it was a very joyous occasion and a remembering and sort of looking at all the things that had changed and had happened over those years.
It was really important to celebrate 40 years of them leading us, to say we love you and appreciate you, and to say thank you for the leadership and care and wisdom that they had brought, and also to say thank you for being faithful to this people in this place. And I know that that often meant sending people out from the place as well, and that probably Murray and Marj wish they were the ones going sometimes.
When I look back at all this 40 years, I think God has been incredibly good to us as a church here. It's been wonderful. And but for Marj and I, it's just been amazing. We came, we came to stay for a couple of years and ended up staying for 40. And I remember coming home after that big celebration we had at Pioneer Stadium with all those people that were there. It was wonderful. Time of thanksgiving and praise and so on. Coming home and looking at each other, and we thought, how on earth did that happen? Here we were, two young people in our mid-20s, and we went into this very dysfunctional church, and we walk away from this amazing gathering of hundreds of people, and we think, well, hey, God's very good, eh? We were put onto a book which very helpfully pointed out that most churches don't do the transition thing very well, because they look for another pastor who will come in and do something totally different. And they said it's important to have someone who understands the ethos, the DNA of the church. I just didn't want to think about it initially because I couldn't see how we were going to do this transition. But the way it worked out was very much in the providence of God, really. And I felt all along, surely God didn't bring the church all this way just to dump us off the side of a cliff at the end of the thing. So it proved not to be.
We took about a 2 to 3 year period of just thinking about a whole lot of stuff about planning the transition. It really started not with jumping in and looking for a new candidate. We started by looking at really understanding what the core values of Spraydon or Southwest were. I remember I was thinking one night we made a big long list of them, actually, a lot of characteristics, and one of my fellow elders looked at the list at the end of the night and said, gee, I'm glad that Jesus promised to come back, because it seemed that he was the only one that could fulfill all of those. But certainly we did have our wish list, yeah.
It was 2007. We were coming to the end of our time at Wellington Central Baptist Church, which we had been for 10 years. And it was July, and I'm not sure if it was Murray. I think he sent an email, something saying like, next time you're in Christchurch, would you like to pop in and have a chat?
Interesting enough, I think of all the people that I've worked with on the staff, Alan was probably most like me. So I suppose this means I fell in love with myself. I think he had, he's a very good preacher, and he led the Island congregation when it grew in a way which none of the other congregations grew. So I thought that's really important.
So he came down a month or so later. I went and saw him. We had a good conversation. And then he wrote me an email about 2 or 3 weeks later and said, I talked to the elders about you and the possibility of you coming here, but do you have any sense of call to here? I sensed that I needed to be ready to come into that role if the church wanted it. But I didn't particularly want it, but I did feel a sense of call. So I thought I was going off academic. I was doing a second PhD on the theology of hope, and I was lining up being a teacher in a theological college. That's where I was heading towards.
But I thought we'd lost Alan to the academic world. In fact, Alan thought Alan was lost to the academic world, I think. And so, but I felt he had the sort of qualities that would enable him to pick up the ball and run with it, really.
And then Murray came back with some more emails, and then they said, would I come down and meet the elders in October 2007? We came down and spent 2 days with them. So that was the beginnings of it. And then out of all that, they said, would you come down here for a year and work part-time? Maybe it'll be half-time, maybe it'll be less, and lead our Sunday gatherings, which is not me, but lead them. and we'll see how the year goes.
But I think the other good thing about AJ was that while he knew the Spraydon story very well, he had also had a 10-year period out of Spraydon, so to form his own leadership style, to lead his own church. So that was some really important experience that he had had. I remember the night we had the vote for whether AJ would be invited to become the senior pastor. You know, I can't quite remember the percentage, but it was something like 99.4% in favour, something almost unanimous. So I think that was that showed that the church was very supportive of the change.
And a couple of people emailed us, they texted us the results, which is quite funny because Ants was one of them, and he said, "You've got the job, mate, but I voted against you," which he did. And I've always felt very, very proud that I chose him to be on the leadership team, even though he voted against me. So it's my little bid for taking on the rebels. The year we had here, which was a year of the transition kind of phase, and Murray was still senior pastor and we were looking at the role, what I really picked up from the elders was this desire that we do two things in the initial stage when I became the senior pastor. One was to replicate. There's a really great life in the church and there's a great mission in the church, and the church had built up a wonderful DNA around word, scriptures, around the sign, the work of the Holy Spirit, and around being a church that did the deeds of following Christ. So that word, sign and deed DNA they wanted to keep. They didn't want someone coming in and changing that, but replicate that. But the other key word was to reinvent. The way the church was functioning, the forms that it had created were, they lived out their best days. And they were saying, well, how do we reinvent with the same DNA for the future? So I guess for me, I brought something into this as well. And I'd spent 15 years looking at the church in the West. I'd done some work on why people leave churches and what happens to their faith and why the church was declining. And there's always going to be standout examples of individual churches that grow. But across the general board, whether it be Europe, America, New Zealand, Australia, the church is in decline, has been in decline for decades and continues to be in decline. And just this great angst that there must be another way of doing church. I felt like the passage in Jeremiah 1, which is a really important passage to me, talks about there's a tearing down and destroying, but there's a building and a planting. And I wanted to be part of building and planting a new way of being church, or a reshape of being church, or something fresh about church in the West. And so I was looking for the opportunity to see God do something new, and a church that was willing to change, it had changed in the past, had a culture of change for the sake of mission. So it was an exciting opportunity to come. So in February 2009, the church actually enacted the transition. So we had this wonderful Sunday morning where Murray was prayed for, Murray and Marj were prayed for, and they could lift that mantle of leadership was kind of lifted off them and that responsibility. And then we knelt down at the front and that was kind of placed on us. The church prayed, the elders prayed, and in one day there was kind of a shift from 40 years of Murray's leadership to this new boy on the block, which was a wonderful day, but it was sort of marked the change. A sort of image that came to me was the image in the first few months actually of a hinge, just an ordinary hinge that you'd have on a door, and the hinge being made up of three parts. There's the part which is screwed to the wall, there's part which is screwed to the door, and there's a pin that drops through the middle. And a sense of this part was like the church had been built up over the years. It was the church of existing leaders, but there was another church emerging of a new dream and a new vision and new leaders. And somehow my role was to try and hold these two parts together. It's kind of like the pin that drops through the middle. Hold them together and really respect and honour what has been, and yet search for and encourage and reinforce what was growing, and try and hold those two together in a way that built the church with both having a voice, both having a part, and both being drawn on. And then the rest of that year was really working with the existing pastoral team and developing a few small things while sussing out what is happening in the life of the church that God is raising to life that's new. What's the Spirit doing? And at the end of that year we had a big vision day, and we brought in what we called a core leadership team. It was a team of 5 who would have key areas of leadership in the life of the church and driving new growth. And we named that we sense God is doing something fresh.
We've always been about local communities, really, in the sense that as a Baptist church, we've always been about local church. It's always been our what we've tried to be. It's just be a local church, and originally, of course, we were in Spraydon, but as we grew, we kind of went through various neighbourhoods and various communities. So the issue there was, how do we maintain, as we grow larger and larger, how do we still be local church? So so local communities were just a way of us actually being local church, planted and grounded in our communities, but at the same time allowing us to grow larger and larger.
There was the challenge of, where do people fit? When they newly come and become a part of the church, or come on a Sunday, or begin a new journey of faith, where do they fit? How do they link in? So Sundays are so big, and they need a locality, a place. And of course we had life groups, but it's not easy for everyone to fit. There has to be a place where everyone's welcome, and the idea that geographical, a local place where they live is where they fit. And even though you don't get on with someone, that's life, because we're Christians and we're a family, and we're supposed to get on. At least we work through the differences because we're family, and that's what families do.
But also we were looking just, what does it mean to be a lifelong follower? As part of our vision was always to be lifelong followers of Jesus. And when you look at that, we came up with this thing of the 4 relationships: a relationship with God, self, each other, and the world, and this understanding of a holistic discipleship in following Jesus. And when you look at that and those 4 relationships, it's just easier when it's lived out locally. If you look at a relationship with one another especially, and relationship with the world, there's something there about proximity that's really important with one another. And when we look at our relationship with the world, there's something of place as well that's often overlooked, I suppose, in Western Christianity. The idea of God is actually redeeming all of creation, which isn't just people, but it's our schools, it's our playgrounds, it's our streets, it's our trees, all of creation groaning. So as soon as you include proximity and the importance of redemption of place as well, kind of local communities just made sense, really.
Addington was the start. It was our way of doing things, and then people who are living elsewhere, what do I do? Do we all move to Addington? Or do we think, okay, where we are, God wants the kingdom to come here as well, but it's going to be different. It always is going to look different, because the needs of different communities are quite different.
In terms of being from Southwest, we were the only people really living in Raleigh at that point, and that was about the same time the Addington community started up.
When I was 13, God put on my heart the Raleigh community, just because a lot of my friends came from there, and it was just a vibrant place to live, and everyone knew each other, kids would play together, and I just thought it would be a great place to live.
We had a cell group of people who were really keen on supporting the Raleigh area and involved in some way, so involved in crossover, or involved in the school, or just in general somehow had a attachment to the community. So our cell group met, and it was us who lived in the community and everyone from outside of the community, which was fine, but there was quite a bit of pressure on us to do stuff at that point. But that was awesome though, because we had the prayer support, especially from a lady called Viv, whose husband had worked at the primary school in the 70s. So she'd been praying for the area for 20 years before we shifted in, 30 years before we shifted in, and so it's amazing that prayer that goes into a community before you even get there is amazing. After a while, people had babies and moved on, and so that was kind of a real turning point for us. And at that point we had a flat of people in their 20s move into the neighbourhood, so it became 2 families, or 2 groups of people, which was pretty cool, who worked at the kindy and worked for crossover.
There's all these connections that are being played out, which weaves the community together, and so it just makes that a sense of strength within the community.
I think at the heart of it there's always this just neighbour to neighbour love, and believer to believer togetherness, and welcome. I think that's always there, and it seems a common pattern that involvement with local schools is there. I think what seems to have lasted the test of time is what's organic, what really is anyway in our daily lives. Let's do that intentionally.
Or if everyone's loving the people next to them, then everyone's loved. And I guess like in this day and age, it's getting less and less, but we can make it really complicated, but God made it really simple for us.
If you like, it was very simply loving Jesus and loving our neighbours. And loving our neighbours because we sense that's what Jesus calls us to do. It's very simple but very costly, and mostly churches have visions that are very complicated and very cheap. But this was really simple, but boy, it's costly. One of the early communities was Harrington, and they were looking into their area and what they could do, how they could be redemptive, and they saw a business would help create that, would help sustain that, and so they started to think about business opportunities.
The business is called Liminal, so there's various businesses under that. There's Anderton Coffee Co-op, there's Liminal Apparel, there's the Anderton Store, there's Jailbreaker Roastery, there's Little River Farm, and also now looking at doing stuff overseas too. So yeah, they kind of all work together under the one business, and it started 2006, 2007. We have 4 values that we run the business by, basically. So the first one's profit. So we unashamedly, we're a business, we're trying to make money. So we try to make as much money as we can. And the second value is redistribution. So the reason we make that money is so that we can redistribute it to the places that deserve it more. So at the end of the day, we pay all our staff, and there's this thing called profit left over. We give the vast majority of that back to our producers, basically, in the communities that are part of the story. Employment, so we look for ways to employ people, rather than trying to cut back on employment and run it as streamlined as we can. We actually look for ways to create as many jobs as we can. And then also belonging, so we look to try to create spaces of belonging. So the cafe is a classic of that, I suppose. We try to make it inviting where people can come and sit the whole day if they want. We have people who come in and they don't order anything, they just sit there, and actually that's all right.
So in February, when the earthquakes happened, we had a lot of things in place, and we'd just been away on a marae. We were willing to go into the bicultural journey, and we just started a series of 6 Tuesday nights to look at the local journey. We'd done one, the earthquake hit, and suddenly we had to slow everything down.
New Zealand's darkest day. At least 65 people are dead, many more injured. The magnitude 6.3 quake struck in the heart of the city of Christchurch.
We had one person who was regularly at church and part of a life group who was killed in the CTV building. We had 5 families who lost people, not necessarily coming to church, the person themselves, but they lost family members. We had a number of people, certainly over 20-25, who had no home from day one, so we're looking for somewhere to live. And we had people whose businesses were severely disrupted or just closed. And then we had all the normal things that people were facing: damaged homes, lack of power, lack of water, people minimally without food. And we were trying to help the community by digging out liquefaction and being involved in supporting and everything we could. Our buildings weren't significantly damaged. So through that first period, we had a lot of funerals. So that was one of the things, not that there were people necessarily from our church, but it was a venue that could hold a lot of people. 2 or 3 days after the earthquake, we picked up the rumours that the building at Grace was badly damaged. Dave McGregor's PA was lucky to be alive and part of the earthquake, and they were unsure what they were going to do next. So I remember walking out into the church car park and just using my cell phone to ring Dave McGregor and say, look, is there anything we can do that would be helpful? And we had this conversation over the phone, something like, well, it'd be good if we could use your building for a few weeks while we have services and that sort of thing. And I said, yeah, absolutely, whatever we can do.
Southwest was amazing. I mean, AJ, basically just said, hey, you're a family and you're welcome to come here and use this place as if it's your own. And they really meant that. They just welcomed us with open arms in every way.
Initially it was around Sunday, and then very quickly it became, look, can we have some office space? Can we do our youth program here on, I think it was Thursday nights? Could we have our women's group meet here or our men's group or whatever? So very quickly it became, not only can we have services here, and we combined for at least 6 months on Sunday nights and had a combined evening service. But could we have other events on? And the other events flowed into, could we have some office space? And then it became, everything. It was sharing IT stuff, it was sharing the fridge and the cafe and all of those things.
Now, we'd always worked together with Spraydon and always had a great love for Spraydon, but I think it developed a bond that is, very, very healthy. Just to be able to say, we're not in competition, we've never been in competition, but there are lots of ways we can really help each other.
And we kept on doing it sort of month by month or 6 months by 6 months. It was actually just over 3 years when Grace was actually able to move back into the buildings.
Alan often said to me during that time, we will do anything we can to make sure that you guys don't go down. And they kept their word. They did that the whole way through. So if we flourish, Spraydon Southwest Baptist can say we're part of that story. And you guys are. You're part of the story of us being able to flourish. And we're grateful, incredibly grateful.
So as the emergency phase of the just post-earthquake started to dissipate, we could then pick up some of the things we've been working on before February 2011. And one of the major things was the local communities. So in July we had this camp at Wainui, and we invited people to come who were interested in the neighbourhood community journey, interested in hearing about it, and potentially interested in being part of it. And for us that meant we lived in Hoekendijk, so we ended up sitting down with a little group of people who were also living in Hoekendijk. We knew a couple of them, and there's quite a few we didn't know. And so that began a bit of a journey of getting to know them and realising, well, if this was serious, we're going to have to get to know these people well, they get to know us well, we'd end up sharing our lives to a rich degree. And I was a little bit nervous about that, didn't know them, possibly wouldn't have chosen them to be part of a team with me, and they probably wouldn't have chosen me either. So a few awkward dinners, conversations, catching up and slowly building relationships. But now, 6 and a bit years later, it's fantastic, and I wouldn't not want to have done it. It has been very, very, very positive for us, and it's built some really deep relationship.
Yeah, Christchurch, when you look from the hills, it can look all pretty much similar. When you look down, it's just this big flat plain. But every community is different and every neighbourhood's different. So we've got communities and neighbourhood communities in about 10 different neighbourhoods now. Yeah, and they're all remarkably different. There's different people from southwest in them, so that immediately changes the makeup of them, what they look like, and different bents and flavours in that. And then the neighbourhoods that they're planted in are very different, and different needs in every neighbourhood.
Yeah, so we've sort of gone from it not being at really the beginnings of community to the church fully supporting and backing communities and
embracing
and asking us for what's happening on the grassroots type of thing. So it's us feeding into the church as well, which has been a real shift.
So there's a whole lot of different needs that arise in the community, I suppose, that we respond to. But they kind of come and go as the needs come and go. But basically what holds is just a bunch of people committed to one another, committed to the neighbourhood they live in, and committed to seeing what the kingdom looks like and coming there.
One of the people in our community was dying of cancer. Marj Reid. It was a sad journey, but once a fortnight we'd all gather at his place, we'd have tea together and we'd pray with him. He'd tell us how it was going, and those nights there were preschoolers, there were primary school kids, there were teenagers, there were people in their 20s and people 30s, 40s, 50s. And the teenagers were just focused and absorbed by what Murray would say. And sometimes as his life was coming to an end, only say a few words. But those meals and those times of prayer and those times of gathering around him, the teenagers were richly part of that and learning so much about life and death and compassion and prayer when it really matters. And it was 70-year-olds through to preschoolers, and they're all part of it. It's a rich environment.
We've got to the point now where people are considering whether to buy a house in which area based on the vision of the church, which actually just wasn't the case. We've got people that are looking at doing full-time foster care next year as a bunch of young adults that are choosing to work less hours so that someone can be around for them. We've got some of our people starting businesses to try and employ people who aren't doing so well in life. It's pretty remarkable.
So two things. One, it was post-earthquake, and there was a lot of talk about the city being rebuilt out towards the southwest, and how the Horswell, Wigram and the greater area beyond Wigram would grow over the next 5-10 years post the earthquake. And secondly, there was the growing, then quite infant-like but still growing, emphasis at Spraydon for local communities. And Dave Bates was leading a local community, or the birthing of one, in the Aidenfield area, and he raised the question about, if we're going to be having communities and there's a place, Horswell Baptist, just down the road, we better go along and talk to them and tell them that we're going to be doing this and why we're doing it. And we're not trying to be in opposition to them, we're just trying to do stuff during the week that will help people come to know Christ. So he did that. And Dave started talking to Roger Spicer, who was the senior pastor at Horswell, and that began a series of conversations that eventually led to a merger.
So Horswell had always been running a light party as an alternative to Halloween, and that had been very successful. Numbers were really good, but we thought we could take it to the next level. So got talking to Dave Bates, who I had a relationship with for years, and talked about what it would look like if we did it together. And I guess it came down ultimately to the question of, can we do this better together than we can apart? And I think that was a bit of a no-brainer, really. I think we pretty quickly came to the conclusion that actually this is worth exploring to see what that might look like.
We were looking at the southwest, we were planting communities in that area, and Roger was aware of some land that was a big potential building prospect for a big potential church site, which would allow room for a whole lot of ministries during the week and for a big service worship venue. And Horswell wasn't big enough to tackle that project really on its own. So somewhere along the conversations between Dave and Roger, they went, maybe there's an opportunity to do a bigger partnership together.
So there was a leadership group formed at that point, which was two elders from Spraydon, which was Pam Arnold and Andrew Jefferson. Two elders from Horswell, which was Andrew Button and Heather Gore, and then Roger Spicer and myself, who were the pastors at Horswell, and Alan Jamieson and Dave Bates, who were pastors at Spraydon. So we started meeting fairly regularly. We had come across a book, Better Together. There's a book that came out of the States, and so we read that, we had a look at that, and that gave us some really helpful information about the possibility, and if we did do it, how we would do it. But I guess the thing really was to seek God and find out what's God saying here. Mission to the southwest was really important for both churches, and I think it was just that overwhelming sense of, man, we could do some really good stuff if we shared resources, shared people, and shared that experience of working together for mission in the southwest. So, and it was a crucial time for the southwest, so it just seemed a good thing to do.
Roger said, I think the only way is actually if we become one church. I think trying to work in partnership and ending up building something or working in partnership and doing mission, it's going to be really, really hard for Horswell as the smaller church unless we kind of really do pull all our resources. And eventually in November 2012, the Horswell Church voted. And the way we pitched the vote was, it was a vote to close the Horswell Church, because that's what you had to do constitutionally. And then all of the Horswell members en masse became members of Spraydon. In the February we had a big gathering of everyone together. We welcomed all of the Horswell people into membership. We did a big service at Wigram. Then 3 months later at our AGM we voted to change the church name from Spraydon to Southwest Baptist, which reflected our new mission focus locally, and also reflected that it was silly to have Horswell written on the Spraydon door or Spraydon written on the Horswell door. It just would have looked out of place, and we needed some other name, and we ended up with Southwest Baptist. We looked at two types of names, generic names like grace, hope, faith, charity, that sort of name, or names that represented locality. We went with locality because we're a local community focused church, that's who we are. We went locality because Baptists have always traditionally named themselves after the local area where they are found. And we went locality because it showed the bigness of the shift. So it used to be called Lincoln Road Baptist Church, it became Spraydon Baptist Church, it's now Southwest. It kind of felt like the move that we were making was encapsulated in the name. As we looked ahead, we saw in 2013 it was going to be 40 years since the church began its new push in global mission. We wanted to celebrate that 40 years, but we could also see that a number of people who were presently on the mission field at that stage were coming back or planning to come back. It's kind of like a season was coming to an end, and what would the next season be? And at that time, Ants and I went on a global exposure trip. We went to Calcutta and we went to Bangladesh. We saw Lamb Hospital with Steve and Chuan, and we saw the Centre for Discipleship with Vijaya. And we were talking about this change of season. And we started to talk with Steve and Chuan and others about the emergence of a neighbourhood community in Asia. That what we're doing back in Christchurch could be done overseas, and teams of people could be involved together in bringing a community to life in Asia. And so that began the beginnings of a new dream, and then in 2016 we were able to send a team to begin that.
Previously, our main way of doing global missions was through an agency. So we'd send people through agencies, and agencies would oversee that work, the longevity of it. You know, when our people come back, it's the agency's responsibility to keep it going and stuff. And our key role as a church was, and still is for many people, to support those people financially and prayer and walk alongside them, and really see our contribution as sending our people. So now we're at the point where we do both. So we still have people with agencies, and in the future we hope people will still go to all kinds of places all around the world and do that with an agency. And then we have a global site, and who knows what it'll be like in 25 years, maybe there'll be a bunch of global sites. But a global site is where it's our church thing, where we've committed to a particular work with a particular people in place, in the same way we would do that with a neighbourhood community back here. So we send our people to that place to serve and walk alongside the poor and unreached in that particular area.
It's been wonderful to celebrate 150 years and to see all the church has learned, all the church has been through, all the church has grown to become. But it doesn't end there. It's time to stretch forward, and it's trying to carry forward those things that have been at the heart of the church, really the mission of the church, into the future. And that's our job, that's our role, that's our prayer, to see this stretch forward into the future, and particularly the big three. This is a church that's been built on word, on the scriptures, and teaching and reading and studying the scriptures, on the work of the Holy Spirit, the sign, and on the deeds. We're a church that roll our sleeves up and put our gumboots on and get involved in the needs and the concerns of the local communities and wider. So that word, sign and deed. It's about redemptive communities. It's about people coming together and seeing broken things healed, seeing lives transformed, seeing people transformed by the news of who Jesus is, and Jesus is Lord in their life too. It's about seeing wholeness, where people can have fun together across generations and across ethnicities, Māori and Pākehā, Asian and European. It's seeing parties, it's seeing kids play in the street, it's seeing old people feeling safe. It's all of that. Redemptive communities. But it's also about seeing people become and growing as lifelong followers. So as we stretch forward, we really are crystal clear we've got to carry those things, word, sign and deed, seeking to live out a redemptive community life and seeing people becoming lifelong followers of Jesus. So we're stretching forward, but we're carrying those things from the past as our DNA, as our heartbeat, as we stretch into the future. And we pray that this will be locally grounded and globally connected. We want to see many redemptive communities here in the southwest of Christchurch, and we want to see those grow, and we want to see them with lifelong followers at the heart and core of them, and people becoming lifelong followers through them. But we also want to see a global connection. We want to see sites that are doing the same stuff over the world, and we want to see a connection where we're learning from each other, where we're sharing the journey with each other, where we're inspiring each other, but also where the needs, the global needs, are affecting how we live here, and the poor of the world are affecting how we live here in southwest Christchurch. It's all of that. Well, this dream is shown in our logo. It's the 3 crosses on the hill of Golgotha where Jesus was crucified, and he reaches out to the people on either side of him. And we just want to love Jesus and love our neighbours. As Jesus reaches out and bleeds for the people around him, we want to reach out and bleed so that communities can be formed, people who love Jesus. I think part of the reinvention and stretching forward for the church is realising there is a groan. There is a groan that the world needs to change. The poverty and the needs of the world and the desperate lives of so many are really, really harsh. And the church in the West needs to change. And so we are committed to doing our part in stretching forward to help catalyse a movement of these redemptive communities with lifelong followers. And that will be partnering with other churches, it'll be encouraging other churches to come on the journey, it'll be joining with other groups who are already on this journey. We want to catalyse a movement of a new way of being churches which is grounded in local community life, local redemptive life, where everyday people can grow in their relationship with God. That's their devotional life. They can grow in their relationship with themselves. That's the formational life. They can grow in their relationship with each other. That's our relational life. And we can grow in our relationship to the world. That's our missional life. And it's not like we do that in different places and with different people, but we do that together in one place where we live, loving Jesus, loving our neighbours, and doing it together, and becoming these redemptive communities as lifelong followers of Jesus. Calling other people to become lifelong followers of Jesus. Being unashamed that we follow Jesus and we believe his life is rich and good. Come and join us. Come and be part of it. And we do it here and we do it overseas. Our dream in catalysing a movement, to be stretched forward, is this would be locally grounded. For all of us, it would have deep roots where we live. It would be about the church. We believe the church is the hope of the world. And businesses will be important, neighbourhood communities will be important, ministries will be important, but actually it's where we all work together as the whole Church of Christ. That's where the richest life of Jesus is seen. That's what Jesus promises in eternity. We believe in it being holistic. It's about the whole of our lives. God, self, each other, world, word, sign and deed. It's not just one of those, but all of those together that brings the rich tapestry of Christian life. And it's this global connection. So we want to help catalyse a movement. We want to be part of a movement. We want to encourage other churches in the West to change, to reinvent, to be part of stretching forward into something which is globally responsible and carries the name of Christ in ways that people can see, they can join in, and they can be part of it.
But once again, this one won't be mine. Just when I think I'm almost home, just when I think I'm almost home, just when